if you're here tonight, I'm assuming, but I'm going to ask the question, how many of you came here because you want to see something different? Oh, no? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you are not here? You don't want to see anything change. Just as it is. Okay, good. We all agree on that, right?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so I want to make sure. How many of you know that it's going to take all of us working together and being open in a collaborative way for that to happen? Some of you think we can do it all by ourselves? I didn't ask that question. No, you don't get to ask the question. How many believe? No? Okay. So the concern here is that some people don't think that might happen. That is not news to me. That is not news to me that you think this might not work. It is not news to me you think that we didn't get enough notice. It is not news to me that you think that this is just checking the box. Right? I understand that, but part of what we want to do is build trust. So for those of you who may not know me, there are a few people in this room who do. And I come with authenticity and genuineness, which I believe my colleagues do as well. I understand the challenges that we're facing. I understand what feels like skepticism to some of us. But the fact is some of us I can't risk being disappointed. So all of that is I get it, we understand it. What's happening tonight, I don't think it's happened before in terms of the city hosting this listening session. So this is what I'm asking, is to recognize that this is the first time. We're trying to do something different. We may not always get it right, but if I didn't think that this was going to be a sincere effort to gather information, we may not be able to answer questions, but to gather information that will allow all of us to create something that will work, I would participate, and I wouldn't have asked the wonderful facilitators for this evening to participate. The reason I'm not facilitating is because I think we need a community voice. We need a person who's in the community who understands, who's been a part of that. That's why I'm not facilitating, right? I know for some of you, we don't have a lot of credibility. So we recognize that. But all I'm asking from you this evening is to give us the best ideas. We want to capture that, and then we'll talk about how that will inform this process. And why did I say all of those things up front? Because I want you to know we get it. I get it. This isn't about lip service for anybody that's in this space. This is an attempt to do something different. This is an attempt to do the right thing. This is an attempt to collaborate and work together in ways that we haven't done before. And there are some growing pains in any process like that. But if we come with open hearts and open minds, I truly believe we can get to better things. Can we agree on that? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
That being said, I think we're ready. So I'm going to start with the Labor Relations Director for the City of Minneapolis. Some of you may know him. Holland, Atkinson will come up, and he's going to tell you a little bit about this process and how we got here and what the history of negotiations. So,
Alberta,
thank
you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And I sincerely thank you for coming down, because I know this is time out of your lives, and it makes me feel good, because I know I'm seeing a lot of civic engagement, and that's precisely what we're going to need, because we really are looking for ideas. We want to make sure we're open and hearing ideas from the community. So what I wanted to start with, and everybody should have got a handout on this, is collective bargaining. It's a super complicated topic. Unfortunately, it's been one that is it's got a lot of misunderstandings out there, just because it is something that's bound up in our local process, it's bound up in state law, our ordinances, and on top of that, although we're reading about the Federation today, the Police Federation, there's 22 labor agreements in the city. And so it's important to recognize that when the labor unions are actually doing their negotiating, they also are interacting with each other, as in they view each other's collective bargaining agreements as well. So it's really important for that context to be out there. So in the sheet, and I'm just going to go over some of these points, and then hopefully I can, if there are some questions, if there, I can hopefully answer those. You know, what is a contract? So the collective bargaining agreement, you're going to hear all these terms. It's contract, it's labor agreement, it's collective bargaining agreement. They're all synonymous, all those things. And it's an agreement between the employer and the labor union. And the labor union, they're specifically there to represent the members that are in that bargaining unit. Now, the group of employees, they're often called a union, but they can go by a lot of names, right? Some are known as an association. The police are known as the federation. And so the contract, like I said, is between the employer and the federation ultimately. So when a contract is reached, or when an agreement is reached, it's actually voted on by the members of the federation, just as it is with our council members when they take a vote on that particular labor agreement.
That's all right.
A lot of people wonder, well, why is there even a contract for this? So in the state of Minnesota, all public sector employees, they have the right to bargain collectively. And it's in a part of the law, Chapter 179A, known as as it says, you can see here, the Public Employment and Labor Relations Act, but I'm just going to call it PELRA, because that's what most of us call it. So the PELRA is actually what allows everybody that's in a public sector job to bargain collectively to choose their representation. So what's going to happen next is, after we get this information, what we, the parties that are to that labor agreement, we're going to actually have a negotiation for the next agreement. As most of you know, the labor agreement as it stands right now, it's actually about to expire at the end of the year. The last one, I know many of you are familiar with this, was long expired by the time we finally reached an agreement. And you know, with that one, the last one expired on December 31st of 2019. This next one is going to go all the way, or this next one, it concludes right at the end of the year, but then the next one is going to start 2023. And in the public sector, in Minnesota at least, no labor agreement may exceed 3 years. So 3 years is the maximum term for any agreement. They could be 1, 2, or 3 years. So what happens is we negotiate and try to reach terms on that agreement. If we can't reach an agreement in our regular bargaining sessions, what we actually do is move into mediation. Mediation is a service that's provided by the state of Minnesota. And what a lot of folks may not be aware of is that the Bureau of Mediation Services, they're the ones who actually provide for a mediator, provide for that service, and they do it because the state is interested in stable labor relations with the public sector. They want stable labor relations. So they want to make sure that mediation services are provided so people can reach agreements. The police are what's known as an essential group. So that means they have no ability to strike. Now, essential units in the state are primarily your public safety. Police, fire, 911, but also the city attorneys are essential, supervisors are essential. So those units inside of the city are essential. Because they don't have the ability to, if we don't reach an agreement, they don't have an ability to enact a strike. What actually happens with their particular agreement it would move to arbitration, binding arbitration. Binding arbitration is another, we'll call it service, that the state allows for. The arbitrators are provided through the Bureau of Mediation Services, and they're what we call a third-party neutral. So they would come in, and if the parties can't agree, then what ends up happening is it's kind of like a court hearing. Both parties make their case. Here's why we believe X changes should happen. And each side will bring their evidence, testimony, previous labor agreements, other labor agreements that are similarly situated, for instance, other police forces in the metro region, sometimes nationally, that we'll consider, and all of that would be brought before an arbitrator. That arbitrator would then have to make a decision on what the next labor agreement actually is. Now, I didn't put this in the materials here, and some of you are well aware of this, and so I apologize if I'm retreading some material that's known. Arbitrators are normally very unwilling to make language changes inside of agreements. So there's basically two giant elements that come down to collective bargaining, right? There's language changes, and then there's economics. And in terms of the language changes, that's probably a big focus for many of you, although I know a lot of you also are concerned about the economics for this particular bargaining unit. So they're both important matters that we have to address inside of collective bargaining. Now the language changes, like I said, most arbitrators, the reason why they're unwilling to make their own language changes is because they typically will state that's something that should be bargained. That's something that you will have to reach in bargaining. And a big reason is because they have a hard time quantifying what a language change is. What would be in exchange for it? Because remember, it's a bargain, right? So there's nothing I'm going to do that's going to compel the Federation to just accept something unless they feel it's good for their members and we reach an agreement on it. Good for the city and we reach an agreement on it. Good for the residents and the businesses, so we reach an agreement on it. All that gets into the mix. I can assure you that Federation is just as interested in making a fair agreement as we are at the city. So that's why it's important that when we do meet and negotiate, we do everything we can to try to make changes. For instance, if we do have changes that are inside of the language of the agreement, that we do everything we can to try to reach that bargain without going to binding arbitration. One, binding arbitration, it's not really clear if we'll ever get precisely what we're looking for in terms of a language change or an economic change. What would be best for the city, best for the residents and businesses. And so the other thing is, because we're not really sure if an arbitrator is going to be able to provide that type of change that we're seeking, I don't know. Is it working? Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Peter. That's why it's important that we work together to try to reach that agreement in our regular bargaining and mediation. Hopefully we'll do it without reaching arbitration. So I just wanted to really tee that up, because another thing about arbitration is the city loses control, right? You're handing over that agreement to be determined by a third party. Maybe it's something we'll want, maybe it isn't, but it is an element where the city would be losing control, the Federation loses more control over that. That's why both parties reach or do what they can. Yes?
May I ask you a question? Because it's my understanding that in arbitration, only those elements of a contract that have not been agreed upon previously are subject to that arbitration. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So you don't lose anything per se, you just don't know what the outcome is going to be on those areas that are not agreed upon, correct?
We would not have control over those elements that are in disagreement.
Right. So then when the last contract was being presented to the city council, it was not true when they were being told that, oh, you'll lose everything that we gained so far, because you cannot go back to those topics that have already been agreed upon. Is that correct? Just making sure I understand.
Holland, can you just repeat it?
Yes, I was going to say, can you repeat the question?
I'll be happy to talk louder.
Sure. So the question is, things that we reached agreement on, would they be retained? Yes. Yes, they would. And the elements that are not in agreement would not be retained.
Those are the only things that go to arbitration.
Right.
Not the whole rest of the contract like the city council was told during the last session.
I can't speak to if that's what the city council perceived. I would defer to my colleagues in the city council for that.
So can I just say this? I don't know what this.
I'm not sure what the city council was told, but I understand what you're saying. And so the reality is, at this point, I don't know how that's going to help us in this process, other than we need to make sure we're telling the piece that you have, that we're saying that properly and correctly, and people understand. I don't know what the city council was told, so I wouldn't argue with you on that at all. But now we know what the reality is, so we have that. So we need to make sure that people understand that that is how it really works. So I appreciate that.
So you're in the room, you say what you were told.
I remember, so.
Okay, well, I don't know.
You repeat it?
It's fine, move on.
Yeah.
We can move on. I just want to make a point.
I appreciate that question, and I think it's really important that we clarify that, like, that people do know how it really works. That's really important. But honestly, if we want to get to what we like to see, if we spend a lot of time and we then put our council members and say, what did you hear? What did you hear? What did you hear? I don't think we're going to be able to accomplish what we want to accomplish. That's why when I asked those questions in the beginning, I'm like, we all want to move forward and get something good. I asked the question for that reason. And so I think the facts are important. Now, that is an important fact. And so I appreciate that. But the thing that we won't be able to do is change what they were told, but we can make sure that the correct information is shared moving forward. Is that okay? Can we agree on that? Okay.
The last thing I'll note is there's a couple of QR codes that are in the back. One actually links to the Police Officers Federation, their labor agreement. Another one links to a new webpage that we put up for collective bargaining. So I encourage you to visit those. And I just want to touch on a couple of items that are negotiated and aren't before I turn it over to Marquita. A few things that are, one thing that in particular that is negotiated. Inside of the state law in PELRA, that's actually that's what states what can be bargained. And specifically, it states that the terms and conditions can be bargained, and it's a technical term, but generally it means pay, benefits, policies that impact the employee's working conditions. So it's something that there's a lot of fluidity in there, but it's not everything that can be bargained, if that makes sense. Because there's certain things that I just want to point out that's noted in the next one. There's things that cannot be bargained, right? And there's a thing in PELRA which is called inherent management policy. Those inherent rights that we have are not something that we actually bargain. So it includes, but it's not limited to, function of programs, budget, utilization of technology, selection and number of personnel. I think I might have mentioned the budget. But during the last contract, it was something that we wanted to make sure that we were explaining. There's a lot of things that we deliberately keep in policy to ensure that we have the flexibility to change it later. And I think it's really important to just understand that a lot of what folks are seeking, that might actually be something that ends up already occurring, or it might be something that we actually address through policy versus the labor agreement itself. So it's important to realize that there's a lot of materials that, when you look at the labor agreement, it's about 133 pages, but the policy manuals, I'm sure the chief can tell me, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages that we have that are in policy, that are binding. It's an inherent management right. So it's important that we maintain that flexibility. Make sure that we keep those items in policy versus trying to instill every policy into the labor agreement. Because if we move a policy into the labor agreement, it then requires us to negotiate again if we want to change it. Again, that's why we want to keep that flexibility. So like I said, a couple of QR codes on the back of this. One is our collective bargaining webpage, and then the next one is for the contract for the Federation. Again, thank you for coming down, and I appreciate it. Yes?
Just a question on process.
The question is, how do we allow the public to have access to the bargaining sessions? The answer is we're still working on the logistics.
Of course they are. That's why what we sued about, ladies and gentlemen. We sued because they would not allow the public into the public meetings. And so we sued about that. In fact, we're in the middle of our lawsuit right now. But don't you let them get away with this, y'all. Do not let them get away with this. Because that's what they're trying to do, is snow you by doing this little process where they're going to let you turn in your little piece of paper. They're going to pat you on the head and say, thank you. But they won't let you be there when the action actually happens. I'm telling you now.
You're working on the logistics.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
That is an outrageous statement. I'm Stacy Gurian Sherman. I'm one of the lawyers, along with Michaela Tussman, who was involved in that lawsuit on behalf of Minneapolis for a Better Police Contract. The law that you just cited, HELRA, tells us we have a right to be at public negotiations. We spent months working with the City Council trying to get the dates of the negotiation for the last contract. Not even the City Council members could give us that information because your predecessor refused to give them out. We then had to file data requests to get that information. By the time those data requests were filed, the Police Federation was in cahoots with you all to move this to non-public mediation, which you didn't talk about. Once this is in mediation, we are not allowed to attend. We then sued to get documents and information that should have been turned over to us. Over and over and over again.
That's right.
We were told there was no information. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of the lawsuit, we get 200 pages of documents turned over to us. We met with every member except one of the former city council. Councilmember Jenkins will remember us going to her and speaking to her about our 14 recommendations. All we wanted was an opportunity to see if those recommendations, which were largely praised by the former city council, were getting to the table. That's it. And this city, under this mayor, refused. So when you talk about that there is mistrust, you bet there is. And at this listening session, you refused to have Mr. James Trice facilitate because he said he wanted to have more ability for groups like ours to present. You turned him down. So this is a sham and more of the same. And it is outrageous for you to get up there and say that we are in the middle of the logistics. We have a right to be at those sessions. We expect the dates, times, location, and access to be published. Period. End of story.
Thank you. So let me be clear, because you said there's a lawsuit, right?
That's
Yeah,
correct.
there is.
So the lawsuit hopefully will be resolved in before, so that if you say we have the right, there'll be a decision on that lawsuit. Is that correct?
Yes, we
Okay.
expect it to be in our favor.
Okay. I'm really trying to remain neutral here. That's why I have my, so I'm just saying, so there is a lawsuit to address that. And I don't know how we'll address it in this room. I think you answered the question in saying you're looking at the logistics. That might be an answer, but regardless, there is a lawsuit that will ultimately resolve this. Melody West.
I would just like to ask, as stated in the beginning, if we could please go forward instead of talking.
I'll start walking.
I'm sorry.
I'll start walking.
I'm just raising my hand to ask if we could, as stated in the beginning, please talk forward versus hear about what was, what happened, what you did, what you heard. I would like to start today and go forward. In this hour and a half.
How can we go forward?
In this 90 minutes, I'd like to.
Well, that's why it should have been 3 hours, as
But
Mr.
it's
Price
90 minutes
suggested.
right now, so I'm just
Okay.
asking.
So I
You
have.
can ask all you want.
Wait. Oh, okay. Here's what is not acceptable. I understand people feel angry. I understand all of that, but we can't attack each other because what does that accomplish? What does that accomplish? You can have difference of opinions, but attacks on each other is not acceptable.
Nobody's attacking anybody.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you ignore history, including the history of this process, you are doomed to repeat it. People are bringing up points about the history of this process that, in my opinion as well, has been to the detriment of the city's residents and citizens. And to ignore that, I'm sorry, I disagree with you, and just go forward as if those things didn't happen is going to doom us to repeat it.
So I agree with you about ignoring history. Here's the thing, what I was told is this is the first time this has happened. The city has held a listening session. So to me, and I could be wrong, this is a new thing or is it not? Has this happened before? Because before everybody said, this hasn't happened with the city or has it? I think this, has it? Is it new or no? Has this happened or not?
You've asked a question.
Oh, we have it city-wise. I just want to make sure because that was a question we asked before. Is that coming?
In the spirit of moving forward, can you please tell us 3 ideas that you currently have had on the table for logistics for providing public input into the bargaining process?
I can maintain one large one, what space would be appropriate for it? That's a big part of it. Because the space itself is going to be, it's going to have to be large enough. Further, there's going to be ground rules for that, clearly, that have to be established before folks enter the room. Typically, those are that only the chief negotiators would be allowed to speak. Also, one thing that will have to be noted in the ground rules is that labor relations strategy is actually also non-public data. So anytime that there's a discussion about the actual components that we may be bargaining, that's non-public data, as I'm sure you're aware.
You're not putting my question about logistics and specifics for what you're doing. Like, do you have ideas for venues? Do you have ideas for, making it live stream for the community, stuff like that?
For the venue, we're still making some decisions on what public building it'll be in. So we don't know if it's going to be at City Hall or in the new public service building or where we're going to house that yet.
So who's we when you're talking about?
Myself, my team, the mayor's work group, specifically, we're going to have to come to terms with those.
I was just going to express that for some of us here, we can't assume everybody already knows the information. So having context around people's questions is very informative for a lot of us. So it's not so much about intentionally moving backwards, but it's about informing everybody about exactly what the situation is. So I now know that this is brand new. I also know when you say logistics, I mean, any space is doable for brothers and sisters like me to learn. So we're not picky. So in the spirit of moving forward, we can have it outside, we can have it in the garage, anywhere you all feel. Don't spend too much time trying to find out where we need to be. Just tell us to be there.
You did ask a question about.
Which question?
The question you asked is whether the city had ever done this before. The answer is the city never has done this before, but we as a community have gotten together multiple times to try to influence the contract. Our organization our coalition spent 3 years attempting to influence the contract, gave the recommendations, was completely closed out of the process. So this is new. I'm skeptical. I'm going to be honest about it. But, I'll watch it and I'll be honest about it.
But I appreciate the honesty. I just wanted to make sure when it was said to me that this was new, that you all agreed that this was new as too. So, because it was new to me. But it's not new, and I know that you're together because my friend Kevin sent me an invitation to one of these and I just couldn't make it, but the community hosted. So.
You've been doing it for a while.
Okay. Pardon?
That's all.
Is that, okay, so what we're going to try and do now is that there's been these areas that have been identified, and I am not going to be the primary facilitator because I said this to Mr. Price, I think it needs to be a community person who is neutral, who has knowledge and has done this, and so we do have a facilitator for this evening. But before we get there, I think it's important also to know who's in the room. So if our council members could just raise their hands so people know who the council members are. We have our council president here as well, so they are present. I don't know if you want to say, no, no, okay. And then we also have our chief of police, Amelia Huffman here. The Cheryl Smith, who is the Federation president, who came as well. And we have not met.
Christopher Gator's chief of staff.
So they're in the room because from what I know, they're as committed as well, but I wanted you to know who's in the room. Anyone else from the city in the room, so people can know who are the city employees? Okay, so you see them. Oh, we also have I almost forgot about you, Dr. Alexander. We have our new Commissioner of Public Safety in this space as well. So what we'd like to do now, we've noted that there are some strong differences. I knew that coming in, believe me. I've been on both sides in terms of working, outside the city, inside the city. I am so dedicated. I think we all this just has to be different. I understand the lawsuit. I believe other people are committed. There's Carolina, she works in our office as well. And I understand the skepticism. And I do think it's important for us to talk about what the history has been, because if we don't acknowledge it, then we're failed to repeat it. But we do want to be able to move forward. Mr. Price?
Yeah, I just want to say we have, 55 minutes to
Yes.
discuss 3 topics, which means that I want the city to commit to having more of these meetings and have them longer.
So
we
I
can
know
discuss
there's-
these in detail.
Okay.
We got 55 minutes.
So the request is to have more of these meetings and have them longer. I am not the person who can commit to that. What I can say is that I know that there's another one scheduled on the 22nd, and I would have to talk to this team because this isn't my meeting. I didn't bring it together. I just have the pleasure of sitting with you and helping to facilitate it. But that is a request. Hopefully maybe there can be some kind of gathering by the end of the night and we can determine if that's something we can move forward.